I'll call this meeting to order. It's a regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee. I'm Councilmember Reich. I'll be chairing the committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Yang, Glidden, Bender, and Gordon. We are a quorum and can proceed. We have 9 items today on the agenda, including a public hearing and discussion item. The remainder are consent. I will go through the consent items. Any council member can pull them after that for further discussion if they desire. Item 2 is receiving and filing the 2016 paving program report. Item 3 is a contract amendment with the University of Minnesota for water distribution system research. Item 4 is the car sharing program, and that's setting a public hearing for February 2nd, 2016 on the following ordinances amending the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances. And it's Title 13 and Title 18 as listed. Item 5 is the Xerxes Avenue South Alley Reconstruction Project designation and setting a public hearing. And that public hearing will be set for March 1st, 2016. Item 6 is the quarterly submittal traffic zones, restrictions, and controls for the fourth quarter 2015, and we'll be receiving and filing that report. Item 7 is the bid for Hennepin-Lindale Avenue reconstruction, and that's accepting the low bid of Meyer Contracting Incorporated for an estimated expenditure of $10,227,254.25 to do that project, and that'll be referred to Ways and Means Committee. Item 8 is a bid for small diameter sanitary sewer cleaning, and that's accepting the low bid of Vortec Hydro for the amount listed, and that will be referred to Ways and Means. I'll move out all items unless there's someone who wants to pull an item. See none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting name. Those items are approved in committee, and we now can go to our first public hearing. Good morning, Director Gaki.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. The first item here is the 38th Street reconstruction, and prior to the public hearing, we'll have Chris Engelman, who is our project engineer with the Transportation Engineering and Design Division, make a presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Chris Engelman. I am a project engineer with the Public Works Transportation Engineering Design Division. I am the project engineer for the 38th Street East reconstruction project. The 38th Street East reconstruction project is a proposed project between Hiawatha Avenue and Minnehaha Avenue on 38th Street East. It's a full reconstruction, so it's the whole roadway, new pavement, curb, gutter, sidewalks, ADA compliant pedestrian ramps, storm drain inlets, signing, striping, and other related items and work are considered for this project. The reconstructed will continue to carry the two-way traffic and add a bike facility in each direction. Parking will be removed for the roadway section, and the proposed street width is 32 feet, except in configurations near the Hiawatha Avenue where the road configuration is already established. We're here today to ask to pass a resolution ordering the city engineer to proceed and do the work and adopt special assessments in the amount of $171,730.88. Pass a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation to authorize the city to issue and sell the assessment bonds, and pass a resolution ordering the city engineer to abandon and remove any areaways in conflict that are in conflict with the project. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Seeing none, thank you. I will now open the public hearing, and this is the public hearing for item 1, the 38th Street reconstruction project as described. Anyone wish to come forward? Anyone signed in? Seeing none. With that, I will close the public hearing and move approval of the item. Is there any further discussion? See none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting name? That carries. Thank you very much. And now we have our, go into our final item, which is item 9, and it's a discussion item regarding the car sharing program policy as we'd anticipated with our previous staff direction.
Mr. Chair, Bill Szyminski, our parking systems manager, will make this presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on your agenda this morning. I wanted to update you on our car share program since the last update we had in this committee on November 10th. If you'll bear with me, I've got some repeat items for the benefit of those that are just kind of tuning into the issue. Some of this is very familiar to you. And then we'll go on to what we've been doing since our last meeting and get into the details of the meat of the policy and ordinance that we're proposing. As you're all familiar with the different car share models that we've been talking about, round trip, where the car is picked up by a customer at a reserved space and the trip is ended when it's returned to that same space. The station-based, which is similar to the round trip in that it uses dedicated reserved spaces, but in groups, where the car can be picked up at any station and the trip ends when it's returned to any other station. And the one we're very familiar with that was used by Car2Go is the point-to-point floating model, where the service area contains all the vehicles and the trip starts when a vehicle is picked up and then ends when it's dropped off anywhere within the service area. And the one we're not as familiar with, but we will be dealing with this, is the peer-to-peer model, which is primarily personally owned vehicles shared in a co-op fashion among known users. So on November 10th, when we last talked, the pilot program had ended. We'd had some time to start analyzing the data that we've been gathering during the pilot program, and we looked at some of the lessons learned in talking with the car share companies and with the advisory committee and others about the pilot program, and kind of going for a direction on where we wanted to go in the future with it. So we also looked at what other cities are doing to try to set some examples to go from for developing policy and ordinance that we'll be getting to. All of this information was included in the pilot program summary report, which was attached to the agenda for today, and we will be finalizing that after today. The November 10th meeting also detailed some next steps where we were going to develop policy for future council action. Some of the things, the highlights in that policy were to try to shoot for annual permitting rather than negotiating contracts, annual reporting by the car share companies instead of quarterly, since we didn't need quite as much information now that we've established how it was working in Minneapolis. The coverage areas, simplified flat rate pricing, the number of vehicles if we were going to control that at some point. All of these things were things that we were going to consider in an upcoming policy. So since that briefing, we've gone out and we've continued our discussions with car share companies, and we've been developing policy, running it by legal, and trying to determine if an ordinance was required, and the determination was that the ordinance is required. And so today I wanted to get into that ordinance and the policy issues in some detail so that we can get on to the public hearing that you consented to. So if it was just a policy and we were just issuing permits with the application process, you give us the application, we give you the permits. If it were that simple, we wouldn't need ordinance, but because we're going to be working on some details of how they do their business and doing some regulation with the policy, we're required to have that in ordinance. So what we're going to get into is how those regulating issues are involved. Some of it's in improving the service areas, the reporting that we're requiring of the car share operators, and the consensus and permission from the adjacent property owners to where there are reserved spaces. You did approve the on consent the public hearing. Thank you, for February 2nd. That's what we were primarily here to ask for today, and to update you on where the ordinance was going. It's very simple. Ordinance, a couple of pages. That part one just gets into putting car share operating on the list of business licenses that are issued by staff and puts it on the fee schedule. Part two gets into establishing that there's a policy that's held in record by the Public Works Director, and it sets for some mechanisms for changing that policy down the road and for council approval to those kind of changes in rates as the program progresses. Our whole issue with the policy was to try to develop a framework that all car share operators could work from on an even keel, and so there's that even playing field for whoever wanted to participate in car sharing in Minneapolis. The application process is detailed in the policy. there'll be a package that includes the business license application and the permit application that gets into more meat, like the vehicle information, where are your reserve spaces, do you have the permission from the adjacent property owners, and details like that. The policy also allows for hybrid plans in anticipation of other models that may not exist yet or may be developed just for Minneapolis. And it gets into how we issue the permits, the logistics of it. The permits will actually run from February 1st to January 31st each year. That kind of coincides with what business licenses is doing with other vehicular type of business license permits like taxis and such. So we're just aligned it with that. And the Car Share Advisory Committee is established in this. This, we think, is part of the key to the success of the program long term. It establishes that the car share operators that want to participate in the program are mandated and required to be part of this advisory committee, so that on a regular basis we come together and address whatever issues may come up and kind of watch the program as it evolves, analyze the data as it evolves, and make recommendations for changes if they're needed down the line. Since there's so many unanticipated issues or anticipated and not known, we feel the advisory committee will be key to addressing those down the line. The policy also gets into some finer details like relocation of cars for abandonment rules after 72 hours, or if there's oversaturation in an area, it allows for a mechanism for us to adjust the limits on the number of vehicles within a particular area. And it also requires the car share operators to comply with local, state, federal laws, pay fines, pay for towing if they get their vehicles towed, and such things as details on how the permits, whether sticker or hang tag, how they're issued, how they're applied, how they're used by the car share operators, and the parking privileges that come along with participating in the program. And that's really the key to whether, good morning, whether the car share companies are going to participate with the city or just completely off street. If they're going to do it in our program, they're getting certain privileges with it, and so that's how we are requiring those certain additional issues that they have to address in participation. For instance, the parking privileges with point-to-point, they get to park at metered spaces. If it's over a 2-hour space, if they're under 2 hours, then those aren't included in what they get to park for free. They can't go over that limit. They also have some privileges in critical parking areas, but they don't get to park on streets where there's street sweeping, snow emergencies, or rush hour lanes, that sort of thing. So the policy regulates what privileges they have in that regard. And the changes to the company, for our benefit, we need to know when they change their service area or the number of vehicles within that service area, because the actual recovery rate on the meters will change due to the density of the number of vehicles within the area. So the saturation point will gauge whether that meter recovery rate goes up or down. And that too, I'll go back here, that's required as part of the annual reporting whenever a point-to-point company changes their service area or the number of vehicles in that service area. We're asking for them to give us their transaction data for a year so that we can see just how much that meter recovery rate should be and gauge a fair level of requirement from them. On the round trip, the details in the policy are getting that owner's permission when they're adjacent to whether a business or a private owner's property. The car share company can't just plop down a dedicated space without their permission. It details that it does not include parking meters for the round trip or station-based, but they're generally parked in one spot and returned to one spot. If the customer parks at a parking meter while they're on their trip, they just pay for it. But these spaces are outside of the realm of the point-to-point where the cars are parking at meters regularly and leaving them there. The hybrid models, we don't know exactly what they are yet. We're just leaving room for them and leaving a mechanism to adopt or adapt the policy as we go along. Peer-to-peer, we don't know where that will be involved yet either, but What we're including in the policy is that if a peer-to-peer company wants those on-street parking privileges and they want to participate in the program, they've got to follow the rest of the rules just like the other car share operators. As we mentioned, the reporting from the car share companies would only be annual and not as much data as you see in the pilot program summary report that we handed out. Now that we have a bit of a direction, we don't need as much, so we won't require as much. And we talked about this other thing with the areas changing. They have to give us transaction data for a year. So we've got a very brief and a shortened version of a flat rate structure. That makes it very easy to understand. When you're looking at the point-to-point structure, there's two levels. Either they're covering citywide, as in A, or they're not. And we're establishing here that if they're not going to be citywide, their service area needs to be 67% or greater. And so the pricing structure here has for the meter recovery, this $680 was based on what the actual rate was during the pilot program in calculating at $680. So that doesn't change between the two different service areas, but what does change is the number of CPAs that are included. The critical parking areas during the pilot were priced at $12.50 each. We're saying we'll set those at the visitor permit level of $10 each if they're covering the whole city. If not, it's $25 per vehicle per CPA that's included in their service area. And for the round trip and station-based, it's about $100 a space for most of the spaces, unless there's a metered area. If they're parking where there was once a meter and we're removing a metered space for it, they pay 80% of the space value calculated on the same kind of basis as we're using for valet spaces and for calculating the value of other spaces throughout the city if they displace that meter. So that's it in a nutshell. The policy also gives us some room for growth in the future and to adapt as we go. We don't know what the hybrid models or the peer-to-peer may ask for. We don't know if we need to control saturation. And while we're anticipating there may be equity issues, we're not quite sure what those are yet, so it's kind of hard to pin those down, but we have that ability to address them as we go and to change the policy with council's approval down the line. And you've already set the public hearing, so that's, again, I thank you for that, and that's all I have for right now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question, if I'm correct, at this point in time, we're not contemplating an aggregate cap on, be it per category or overall multiple category aggregate numbers at this point in time?
Not yet, no. First, we haven't actually seen the proposals from Car2Go, one of the largest carriers that's actually working now. So we don't know exactly what they're pitching or what their density or their saturation point is from their intention. Mm-hmm. And some of this, again, like other things, we'll find out if we start getting citizen complaints that there's 10 cars parked in their neighborhood and it's oversaturated, then we can address that through the advisory committee. And the policy allows for the public works director to actually set saturation limits if needed.
And our current operators are our universe of operators. We don't have any new operator on the horizon.
We've had interest from others, but nothing specific as of yet.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a related question. I think it makes great sense to move from the contract model to this permit model that you're proposing. Could you describe what would happen if a new operator came to town and how they would go through that process for the first time to get a permit to operate, and how would their proposal be evaluated?
Sure. You know, I would expect that the first thing they do is call me and have a bunch of questions to answer. And I would guess that their first step with the policy would be to pick up an application package. That would include the business license application and an application for the permits, which would wherein they would detail the cars that they're going to have, the number of vehicles that they want permits for, which model they're following, or if they're following a hybrid type of approach, a description of how they intend to meet that so that we can set pricing for it. So we would take their plan, look it over, see how it dovetails with the rest of the policy, and kind of go from there.
Thank you. And then since we had discussed it, you went over it in your presentation, but so since Car2Go is moving, is sort of transitioning their business model, could you talk about how that is evaluated through the permit? So you've created a financial incentive for companies to serve this larger city area. Could you talk through that a bit in more detail?
About Car2Go in particular?
Or just that kind of business model where there's some point-to-point and some of these stations in the outer neighborhoods.
Yes, Mr. Chair, council members.
And again, I know you had said that you don't have a specific proposal in front of you, but just since we have talked about it kind of every time we've discussed this in committee, I just wondered if you could go in more detail on where
Understood.
that negotiation is at.
Yeah, and I've been talking with all of the car share companies and where they intend to go with all of this. Car2Go is still, from our last discussion, committed to doing station-based outside of the 67% that they're, even as of yesterday, we're still working on where those boundaries would be to meet that requirement. We're still in discussion, but we think that at least in Car2Go's case, we're going to be able to arrive at something that still meets with the requirements of the policy. And a key to all of this, too, is that whatever they get, we'd have to be able to offer to any other car share company. So we want to make sure that it's even and equitable no matter what it is that's applied. But we want to make sure that it fits in with the policy as well. Does that answer? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Yang?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to this, once the policy takes effect and the car sharing programs or companies out there decide that they're going to not cover the whole city, I mean, what recourse do we have? Can we do anything to incentivize them to cover the whole city?
We can. Mr. Chair, council members, we've got the mechanism to change the policy if it's necessitated. But too, we have to consider all of the car share companies at one time. And right now, those that are on the round trip model, and I'm not just exclusively those that are doing it through our pilot program, but of the there's car sharing round trip from Revel is a new company. Zipcar, which is all off-street at this time, and our car. As we look at where their vehicles are placed, they're very much focused in the same kind of areas that Car2Go was proposing. So it really is a matter of coverage between all of the car share companies and seeing if there is a question of equity and access. If there's a neighborhood that does have that demand, much of it can be market-driven, at least at the start, while we kind of dip our toes in the water. But as we find these things out, the advisory committee can take those issues under consideration and make recommendations for changing it or possibly incentivizing, covering such areas that might later on say, wait, we need a car share vehicle in our area. Right now, it's very market-based, driven by where is the usage and where those customers are.
Right, and my fear with this market-based approach is just that it's going to cover an area that's pretty close to downtown, and all the outer areas of Minneapolis may not be covered. And I think at some point we need to figure out how to incentivize folks, or I don't know, require folks to cover areas that are much more outside the downtown core. Just because if we don't do that, I mean, it just makes for folks to cherry pick specific areas and just focus on that. And I get it. I get the market forces, but I also just think that in some ways there are places in the outer reaches of Minneapolis that need these services too, and or if these services tried harder, I mean, they could grow a constituency or a group of customers that are loyal from that perspective. And so, like I said, just take a look at that. But thank you though.
Yes, sir.
And
Thank you.
we are continuing to explore that satellite model where you have their market-driven core plus an enhancement that would kind of go right to what Councilmember Yang's talking about.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. As I said, we're still talking with Car2Go, and I think this is in reference to their reduction of service area, and they are still committed to putting those additional stations out there. They're still looking at 6, and they haven't, it's a little difficult for them to go out and get permission from the adjacent property owners, since we don't have a policy yet to follow from. So it's which comes first kind of thing. And so they're trying to identify where those areas would be, but they are, at our last discussion, still very much committed to having those stations outside of the core service area they're proposing.
And I suppose somewhat extrapolating on the points referenced by Councilmember Yang, those could be marketing venues as much as just the cars are there, here's the amenity, use it or lose it sort of thing. It could also be a chance to build market in those areas that currently don't demonstrate that type of activity. They become educational centers and outreach centers as much as here's the cars for you in this corner of the city.
Sure.
Any further conversation? No, seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For this presentation and ongoing consideration of policy changes and ordinance changes. With that, if there's no further conversation, I'll move to receive and file the update of the proposed car sharing program policy. Any further discussion? See none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That is approved, and we've concluded today's agenda and this meeting.